Very often in discussions, we find these various points of view, and particularly in terms of how did we get here? When I say we, I mean how did we as humans manage to evolve with the human brain and have this complex capacity to understand or even inquire about the nature of who we are and what is this universe all about. Inventing highly sophisticated, complex machines, discovering the capacity to communicate as we are now by understanding some principles, some working principles at the very microcosmic level, the quantum level. Quanta meaning a unit. The first unit, called quanta, was proposed by Max Planck as a mathematical solution to a problem to do with radiation. But it was taken by Albert Einstein as something quite serious. And by applying these units, minimum and maximum quanta, and by thinking of things as discrete particles, even though they look like waves, light waves, we all understand that light seems to come to us in waves. And yet, when we look at them closely, we can see photons or particles. And the curiosity of particles and waves is always there. Now, our Vedanta philosophy has a solution to this. It depends on if you're looking at it and trying to measure it as a particle. If you assume it's a particle, it behaves like a particle. If you assume it's a wave, it behaves like a wave, which means there's absolutely nothing certain in this life. That's a very brief summary of a physics conclusion. With this caveat, nobody knows why. But we suggest we know why. And that is, this is not an actual world. Don't take it as an actual world. It looks like an actual world, it feels like an actual world, but we always have to remind ourselves that it is just a kind of play of waves. If you think that the supreme principle behind everything is a player playing with waves, then we can form a relationship, as it were, to try and understand this principle by thinking of that element as a divine player or sports person. Now that has, of course, a very good practical function in life, because it means we don't have to take life so seriously. But is life not very serious? Do we not have all kinds of serious problems in our life? Do we not have problems with people and problems with circumstances? And the greatest problem we seem to face, and we have always faced, is the problem of death. We put it in human language and say it's a problem. It's not really a problem, it's just a fact. It's a fact, but why do we use the language problem? Because we don't want it. We want to live forever, and many religions are born on the basis that we want to inquire, can we live forever? Do we have a route to immortality? Can we, like the prayer says, go from this unreal to the real, or the impermanent to the permanent? Can we go from the darkness of ignorance to the light of knowledge? Can we go from death to immortality? Is it possible? The prayer says it's possible. We just have to request it, probably assert it. But on what basis? So we have to train our understanding in such a way that we can, for practical purposes, deal with the world in front as if it were a reality. And on the other hand, remind ourselves of the perpetual nature of what lies underneath it, the thing that is immortal and the thing that never changes. So this supreme reality that religion calls God is beyond our range of thought. There, the mind comes back together with the senses, says the scripture. And so the only one that knows this supreme principle really will be the supreme principle itself. So how do we deal with it? Well, we can, if we have an eye to see it, catch the glory that is indicated by the order and rhythm that we find everywhere. And when we inquire, how did we arrive as we are arriving? We have to go way, way back. Because for the first majority portion of this planet Earth, there was no recognizable thing that we could call life. There was bacteria, no doubt, single-cell organisms, maybe 1 micron, that is 1,000th of a millimeter long. If you take that kind of bacterial shape, and about half a micron wide. So tiny that actually we can only observe it through an electron microscope. This bacteria were doing some remarkable things. Single-celled organisms being alive, developing into multicellular organisms. And so that really nothing much is happening until, let's say, 550 billion years ago, or 550,000 years ago, I should say, 500 million years ago. The Earth being probably around about 4.54 billion years, so they say. Our Vedic calculations will put it as 4.3 and odd billion years. Never mind, we won't argue the toss. It's approximately 4 to 5 billion years. And really only the last 500 million years of that lifespan, things start to happen. Things start to move. So that when we see biologically how are we related, we should go all the way back to single-cell organisms. But these single-cell organisms are distinct from chemicals. In other words, there's something that urges them to move, urges them to feed, urges them to absorb nutrients, urges them to throw off all the waste products that they don't require, and the capacity to move, to swim, and the capacity to reproduce. The most remarkable thing is, how does the bacteria, simple single-cell organism, which when you analyze it is extremely complex, how does this know how to behave? And there must be some inner urge. Biological evolution doesn't supply us with a motive. It just says there's a natural selection going on. It just says that there's a process of elimination, a kind of selection process whereby those that are strong, those that learn to survive, those that learn maybe to dominate their food and eat and reproduce successfully, bacteria do it every 20 minutes, these will survive for generations. They will adapt to their environment, and in some cases, they will actually learn more. And in learning more, in order to survive, they will then form new shapes. Until ultimately, when creatures become quite small, they used to be very large, when they became very small, how would they survive individually? An inventiveness that nature supplies will make a collective thing. Ants, bees, termites, they all make a collective effort. And this collective effort makes things big again. If you say the human body is a marvel of ingenuity and a marvel of design, I would have to agree. Because every single cell of the body, some trillions of cells, all cooperate. All of this indicates only one thing, really, that there is a glory that is represented in the order, the rhythm of the universe, but we cannot take away the idea of intelligence. Intelligence has to be there. Intelligence, not being a haphazard thing, comes out as intelligence on the basis that you can't get out something that wasn't put in the first place. So there's some intelligent component which is there, driving us toward a kind of unfoldment, being there potentially. That is the yogic or the Vedantic view of evolution, unfolding. I mentioned before, if you take a piece of paper and you have it folded, when you unfold it, you don't create anything new. There's a totality which is still there and always there. Or you may say, oh, totality, unfold for me. Oh, totality, reveal yourself. Oh, totality, I see that underneath everything, that when you view it from the totality point of view, what we might say the holistic point of view, you will see there cannot be any change and there cannot be any fractionation of it. Totality is a totality. So this is how we manage to get to that which is almost unknowable by normal perception, almost unthinkable by natural thought processes. So that everywhere we look, we can see a kind of signpost. Lord, you are here. Lord, you are there. And we use the human idea about it as a starting point. In 1900, Swami Vivekananda gave a most amazing lecture, Is Vedanta the Religion of the Future? And he questions it. Actually, he answers it up front and says, I actually don't know. It depends on some things. First of all, Vedanta has never been a popular religion, if you want to call it that, because most religions that survive today and have become successful have certain key components that Vedanta does not have and will not have. For example, a book. Well, Vedanta says, well, one book is as good as another. We won't labor too much on the one book, because most of the scriptures of religions will not contain the whole truth. In fact, all of them don't have the whole truth. They have partial truths and so on and so forth. But no one book, you cannot contain truth within one book. Today, people swear by the Bible, both in legal terms and every other sense. But you see, when you look at a collection of works, more or less a library, written for different people at different times, you'll see some wisdom within it. You'll see some wisdom, for example, in the Judeo-Christian Bible. You'll see the wisdom of Proverbs. You'll see the beauty of Psalms. But you'll also see a number of other things. And so how to sort all that out? And yet, every successful religion will have a book and swear by that book, be it the Quran, or be it the Bible, or the Jewish Pentateuch, or the Christian Gospels, or the Hindu Vedas. But the Vedas have a peculiar characteristic. They're not registered as a book. No more than you'll find gravity revealed in a book. If it is true, it will be discovered. How will we discover it? Through an avenue of spirituality. That is, looking for pure spirit. Not looking for anything else. Looking for that which is beyond the range of our thought. Well, if it's beyond the range of our thought, it's not an object, it is the thinker. If it is beyond the range of sight, it is not what is seen, it is the seer. It is beyond the range of knowledge, it is the knower. And the knower can never be known, and the seer can never be seen. This is the basis of the Vedanta philosophy. So we find that the idea of looking at what we might call nature, broadly speaking, with all its characteristics from the single-cell organism to the complex human, we will see that there is a statement in the Upanishads, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is telling us about a dialogue between Yajnavalkya and Gargi, a woman sage. And Yajnavalkya talks about the imperishable, talks about the inner controller, talks about that which cannot be known by the mind, for example, but not by any external thing, but by an internal thing, since it's an internal controller. So we have to learn to direct our thoughts from any aspect of this glory, in its multifaceted glory, to his blissful presence all around. And rehearsing that and practicing that leads the way. And we do it especially in our own heart. This is called meditation. We may choose to call this universe, if we like, a creation. And then we look on that supreme principle as a creator. No harm in that. It is basically a kindergarten concept and has a usefulness, but it's not the end of it. And if we call it a sort of protected field, then we must love this supreme principle as a protector and feel protected. And we may see this life also as a play, maybe a play of waves, physical, vital, mental, intellectual, artistic, and spiritual. In that case, we revere that supreme principle as a player. But that's the other thing in terms of Vedanta, being a religion of the future. Because the second principle, first principle, have a book, second principle is have a personality. And there are no personalities in the Vedanta, which is called the Upanishads. None whatsoever. In Judaism, you have the prophets. In Buddhism, you have the prophets. But in Islam, you have the prophets. In Hinduism and Christianity, you have the incarnations. So we have to anthropomorphose this being as a good starting point, no doubt. But we don't leave it there, because Vedanta, in its final conclusion, takes away books, takes away personalities. The next thing, then, that religions have that Vedanta will deny will be the presence of uniqueness. Because for a religion to grow and flourish and be successful, it has to declare a complete uniqueness. My religion alone is true. All others are false. Without this kind of fanaticism, we don't find any growth in this religion. And yet, this various uniqueness is counter to the Vedantic idea of oneness. And it's not a bargaining process. We knock out this doctrine and I'll knock out that one. No, it's an underlying fundamental source which is only one. Another thing that most religions will have, therefore, in this uniqueness will be a uniqueness about that supreme principle. Only my God is true. Your God is false. In Hinduism, of course, there is a wide range. So there's an element of democracy within it. Even so, there is this kind of aspect of an extra cosmic creator entity, something outside ourselves, where we have to humble ourselves so much that we lose sight of the fact that Vedanta is claiming, you and I are that God. There is only that one God, and it is inside everything. It is through everything, as everything, beyond everything. That's our final conclusion. That really is Vedanta. And so, in answer to the question, Swami Vivekananda in his lecture says, is Vedanta the religion of the future? He points out a possibility. In America, where there's an element of democracy, they replace the royal personage, they replace the king, and they've made a unit, an administrative unit, a republicanism, which says that everyone has an equal right. In other words, in terms of Vedanta, every person has this equal claim to be fundamentally pure spirit, and that spirit is oneness. But for religion to dominate, you have to have a king, a queen, an extra cosmic entity that has to be worshipped. And so with none of these present, we don't know if Vedanta is the religion of the future, because all of these things are absent, and yet it is the highest conclusion of the whole evolutionary process that we are going through. Remarkably, in the Cambrian explosion, let's say 500 million years ago, let's say 550 million years, I should say, not billion, 550 million years ago. And if I said 1,000, please forgive me, I mean million. It's 500 million, 550 million years ago. So then something remarkable happened. Creatures start appearing in the sea with mouths. Predators started appearing. Curiously shaped creatures that have no resemblance to, or very little resemblance to, the things we find today. In the fossil record will show the abundance, maybe 50 or 55% of fossils would be trilobites with different forms, with an extraskeletal apparatus that had the capacity to be very pliable and yet very restricted. And these would have grown very big. They would have grown to maybe, something like 1 meter, some of them, if not more. And so we find this domination of species fighting to survive. But look at the design. We may ask this curious question, in all these fossils, with all this diversity, how and why? Why to survive? So intrinsic to the process of evolution is the conviction of existence itself. And when we talk about this supreme principle, we are saying it is the only existent thing. All the other things can come and go, but the one existent thing is this. We call it existence itself. And then we also say chit, not only consciousness, self-consciousness, etc. The implication is that in its expression, but intelligence. The intelligence to defend yourself. And in defending yourself, you'll make a form that is available to protect yourself. A shell, for example. Even today, crustaceans will have it. Or a proboscis that has the capacity to attack. Sophisticated eyes. Many, many more times the number of the human eyes, but also much more sophisticated. Having the capacity in the retina of the eyes to reflect many, many different colors, many different shapes. And these tiny, tiny little eyes in the head, able to see, have a 360-degree vision, all designed to either act as a means of catching food or an act of protection, defense, or an act of domination. All of this reflects intelligence. Surely, what other explanation is there? We cannot say that these animals, these creatures, primitive as they are in their operation, only concerned with food, survival, and yet in creating a strategic modus operandi, there is a great deal of intelligence. Now, our intelligence is one thing, our wisdom is another. And so as this evolves, we find more and more wisdom coming out. The mammalian wisdom is there, a sense of play and fun. We take ourselves very seriously, but dolphins never do, it seems. They enjoy play, they enjoy springing up, they enjoy crashing down in the sea, they enjoy spinning. And so we find as all this develops more and more, we find sensitivity, emotional sensitivity growing. We find intelligence growing more and more, the apparatus for intelligence growing as well, until finally we come across a being that is capable of transforming their environment and transforming all the negatives into positives, and ultimately revealing their own inner nature after billions of years to be pure, pure spirit, pure, pure God, nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. And so we are told people perceive his sport, but none perceives him. This infinite entity is described in the terms of being self-luminous light. It is not subject to something else. And it's seated in the middle of all the organs, whatever they are, however primitive, however sophisticated, and ultimately reflected in the intellect. It seems to imitate the movements of the intellect. It thinks as it were, says the scriptural text, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. They use that as it were. It thinks as it were. It quivers or shakes as it were. For being one with dreams, it gets beyond the waking world, which represent forms of death. And death in this context really means ignorance and all its offshoots. Now, one thing that we don't agree with is many religions will have to have this concept, one way or another, of sin. Swami Vivekananda in his lecture points out there's only one sin in Vedanta, and that is to call yourself a sinner and acknowledge sin, a sinner and acknowledge sin. Because that's your ignorance of your own nature. Yes, we make mistakes. He very wonderfully points out. We have good successes and good failures. But what we are today, in other words, all the benefits that we have today are because of successes and failures, are because of good things that we did and mistakes that we made. Glory unto the mistakes. He says something along those lines. So if you take up any book, such as the Bhagavad Gita, you go to, let's say, the 9th chapter and the 10th chapter, you'll see innumerable lists. Even chapter 7 onwards, they contain over 50 examples between chapter 7 and chapter 9. In water, that glorious one appears as sapidity, in the earth as smell, in the sun, the moon as lust. And if you study, for example, these trilobites and all these creatures that took years to evolve, and beyond that has taken years to evolve until us, you cannot help but wonder at the intelligence behind it and the directed movement behind it. Never mind about the vast quantity of years that went by. You can see this gradual changing, this gradual learning and adapting, even to the extent of combining forces in a social community such as termites, ants, bees, and ultimately the complex series of cells called the human. And so, here's life in all creatures, austerity in ascetics, strength in the strong. Whenever you see an exhibition of power, there you find it. Today, of course, is Pentecost for the Christians. And what is the significance of that? It is to harness what is called spirit, this indomitable power that the yogis call prana, this cosmic energy which we all have access to if we attune our mind and energy toward it. We can tap into it. And in doing that, we may as well take that energy as raw material to transform our own life and that of others. Why not? Isn't it a better thing to do than wasting it, squandering it on things like resentment and anger? And so many, many attributes are put: the strength in the strong, desire which is not opposed to virtue, beings and objects possessing purity, activity, inertness, and so on. And all these with a simple formula, a threefold formula of balance, illumination, and stability, energy, outwardly moving energy to do with survival of individuality, and tamas, capacity to sit quiet. So again, we can shift our point of view, or the point of view is inevitably shifted so that we don't have any constrained idea of any limitations. And so he is not in them. That being is not in them. Rather, they are in him. But later we can shift this point of view and say, nor do they exist in me. And behold, my divine yoga, it means my divine display of absolute apparitional, incomprehensible puzzle, which is inscrutable. And we call this Maya. Related to the word magic, something that is an appearance put before us in order to screen the reality that sits behind. And the only purpose of that will be for us to evolve and change and learn and play, gaining experience moment after moment, not self-blame, not dwelling critically on the past. Why did I do this? Why did I do that? Not self-blaming, not condemning oneself, not putting oneself as a miserable worm or a sinner. Even the worm is one with the Supreme. And so in the final analysis, neither nature nor the deep divine self is fully describable. And that is why today modern physics, modern biology is still trying to understand the curiosity called nature, how it came to be and how it came to be driven. There are certain mechanisms we understand, mostly we don't. And so, beyond your thought, beyond human speech, and in other words, we are tricked by a kind of relativity of perception. And when we catch the trick, it becomes a revealing factor for us, and we value it in a different way. So these are some points to do with, well, I quoted from Swami Vivekananda's lecture on 1900, and I've also quoted a little bit from the Upanishads and from the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and so on. So I've shared some thoughts, and that might stimulate some questions in you now. And so I'm going to mute the microphone so that you can raise any questions you might have based on what I have just said. You see, you're not going to get away with it. You have to ask a question. Good.
In our meditation, when we go to I am that, but yet in our prayers, we say, as thy child servant, please make me worthy humbly to love and serve thee. So how can we have the two at the same time? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. It makes sense. So you see, when we learn from supplementary positions. For example, when you went to the kindergarten school, you would have learned some things. I don't think they would have taught you calculus. Would that be right? They would taught you ABC, 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Right. So normally speaking, we would have to go from the simple to the more complex, or in this case, really it's the other way around, but never mind the technicalities of it. So there are supplementary positions. The one position is our experience that we are separate from everybody else. We are separate from everything else. We have an individual environment and an individual history. And so we can't avoid that starting point. And this starting point comes under the heading of dualism, When we try to understand something higher, it's something that can be used. Taking the raw material that we have, the assumption of our separateness, do we deny it or can we use it? Well, to deny it would be one method, no doubt. But mostly we can actually take it and we can use it. So we can use it by assuming that the entity we are praying to is separate, but that doesn't really work long term. It makes us beggars. So we have to bring it down into something more intimate. And we have to get out of probably the orthodox conditioning that we are not worthwhile, that we are the lowest of the low. Some people in some cultures will find it very difficult culturally to admit anything good about themselves. If you ask people, particularly people with a very low self-image, sense of self-image, can you say something positive about yourself? Name 3 things you like about yourself. And those that struggle, you will find, are people who have been culturated into a low self-image. They've been told, you're not allowed to say anything good about yourself. But when you really are honest and write down the things that are unique to yourself, every person, assuming every person has an individual positive role to play in the world, something designed that nobody else can do. Your uniqueness in this world as an individual, it surely is honest to put the flaws that you have and the positive qualities. And when you do a mass balance, you'll find you have many, many more positive things than the negative. Absolutely. Most people are good people. There are no bad people, only bad behaviors, and they can be adjusted. We have no business to criticize people. We have every business to criticize behaviors, provided our own behavior is perfect. That's the problem with people who are critical. They assume that they are perfect, and they're not. So we have many flaws. I like to say we have many flaws and many ceilings too. So we have the opportunity to see the positive qualities and focus on that more and more and more. And then we understand that we are valued, even valued as creatures, thinking God is a creator. And with that, being valuable and being loved supplants any idea of self-criticism or assumed criticism or judgment from outside, from an external creator God who judges, criticizes, condemns, rewards, punishes, etc. These are human qualities, not divine things. Then as we form a better relationship, then we become more familiar, as any human relationship becomes, because we start seeing that that divinity is within everything. That is a much better position. It takes us out of the begging position and puts us into the adoration position, cultivating a sense of wonder, a sense of adoration, a sense of thankfulness. And as that develops more and more, and particularly in meditation, that leads us to a position ultimately of oneness. Only at that point can we say, I am that. I am the divine self. Otherwise, what we're thinking is, I, the psychophysical, is God, and that is wrong. It's false. It's not true. But at the fundamental level, I am the Supreme Self. And to get to that point, which is a point not of intellectual understanding, but a point of experience of pure being, because at that point there's no division. You cannot say, I am God and everybody else is not. You have to say, I am that, which means that spans a unity of existence everywhere. So in Vedanta, we're not looking for brotherhood or sisterhood or anything like that. We're looking for oneness, that there's no distinction anywhere with anyone. And so it's a gradual positioning toward that point. It's not a contradiction. It's a supplementary position, going from a sense of duality to a sense of, I feel one with everyone. I feel a part of the divine. I feel that everything is a spark or fragment of that one, until ultimately in oneness there can be no fragments. There's only a totality. And each position is not different. If you want to take Jesus, how he said it, my Father in heaven, a dualistic position. I am here, Father is there. Secondly, I am the vine and you are the branches. There's a connectivity. And finally, I and the Father are one. This I and the Father are one, we have to take seriously for everyone. Christian theology puts it in a unique way, but that's what makes it a competitive religion. But Vedanta says, no, not at all. If one person said, I and the Father are one, declared it seriously, it applies ultimately to all of us at the deepest level. So I hope that's understandable.
Yeah, thank you, Swamiji. Yeah, that's good. I must partake in that exercise of writing things down, and because I was kind of reared with an inferiority complex where I was always criticized as a child. I never praised.
Yes.
And,
yeah.
And that's
that that carves deep into the psyche, But it comes along with this this endorsement. I am different. That is, I am separate. And when we come to the deepest level, we find that separateness goes. At that point, we can assert, no, I and the Father are one. I am one with the Spirit. Spirit is all there is to is. Spirit is everything. What we see as the world is spirit. What we see as beings within it is spirit. What we see as the fundamental foundation is spirit. What we see as the end is spirit. What we see out there, so-called, is fractions. And when we look at it from a proper point of view, we see the totality. It's like looking at a picture and identifying the different pixels. When we move away, we see the generalized totality. And when we get to that point of view, then all this individuality with the individual aberrations of the psyche that has been hammered into us, all these psychological aberrations go. We have to go beyond the psychology because I'm not the mind. The mind is an instrument. And at the unconscious level, it may be there, but we have to use the conscious level to rearrange our habits at the deeper level. The habit of feeling worthwhile, the habit of feeling I have a role, and the habit of I am loved by a loving being, and finally, I and the Father are one. There is no separateness. I am that. Any other position apart from that is kindergarten religion. Nothing wrong with it, but we have to outgrow it, isn't it? Just as we outgrew the ABC, the 1, 2, 3, we still use it. But we now go on to different things, better things. So we have to outgrow the childish element that is there in our personal history, and we become more mature. And the ultimate maturity is, I and the Father are one. And everything else is one. All is one. There's no separation anywhere. It is all pure spirit. That conviction has to come, particularly in meditation.
Thank you, Swamiji. You look well. Thank you.
Thank you. All good. All right, so we conclude. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
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 Thank you.